Welcome back, and what a delight to have back with us today Jodell Onstott. She's the author of this big book. It's called YHWH Exists. Fascinating book. One of the great resources of our day. It's a must for every pastor's library, anybody that studies the scripture and history. She has really done a great service by providing this. It's called YHWH Exists. And you can go to YHWHExists.com is the website as well. And Jodell, I got to tell you, I've been kind of wrapped up on the hidden judgments. I was reading in the hidden judgments part of your book, and I was just fascinated by it. And that was after I just finished reading First and Second Chronicles, and then all of a sudden I flip over in your book, and there's hidden judgments, and I'm going,
Yeah.
So, how are you? Good to see you.
I am wonderful. Spring has sprung, and I'm great to get out in the weather, and I'm enjoying the different discussions that are going on politically, as well as, things that are occurring. You mentioned judgments, religiously. The opportunity to discuss these ideas is just something that I think we often take for granted.
Well, you do a wonderful job. Thank you for your service. Listen, let's get right into it. And we wanted to kind of talk about the biblical qualifications for leadership. This certainly ties into the election cycle, but it also ties into just church leadership as well. And I'm so glad you're tackling this, because I think we've kind of watered this down to be convenient. I mean, the Bible's pretty clear about leadership, isn't it?
It really is. And historically, I can remember as a child, anytime there was any implication of immorality, of anything that was not impropriety of any sort, that politician automatically resigned, because what our parents understood was that if you did not rule well your own house, as it's mentioned in 1 Timothy, if you don't rule well your own house, how are you going to rule well someone else's house? So those are concepts that I really think we've kind of declined from over the last, 30, 40 years.
Well, all of your research does point towards kind of biblical ideas on government, and how you've carried that over not only from ancient times but into our founding fathers. But here we are now, qualifications for a candidate. And I am surprised, and maybe you are too, we have gone from disqualifying people because they didn't believe the way we are, and they didn't believe in some of the tenets of our faith, to where almost this election cycle, it's anything goes.
It really is. I will have to admit, this election cycle has been fun. It has been fun to watch. There is energy. There has been life. Something that I don't think we have seen in 30 years from an old, stoggy, good old boys system, where the people don't feel like they have a voice. They don't feel like they can make a change. But I think we have to be careful with that, because I think we can get wrapped up in the hype and lose sight of our values of what should make a good candidate. So some of the things that we find in Scripture as far as a good candidate, we find that he has to rule well his own house. In Deuteronomy 17 gives the qualifications for the leader of ancient Israel. And a lot of these really transcend time and era and society, and they're really universally applicable. So some of these are the idea that he doesn't have a large harem. Back in ancient times, they would have a lot of women that they would take care of. Today we could put this modernly as not burdening the taxpayer with expensive vacations, with an expensive wardrobe or an entourage, something that has to be maintained at taxpayer expense. You also have the idea that he has to be somebody who upholds the law, someone who is a law-abiding citizen. And the idea that he is the husband of only one wife. How many candidates would be eligible if their divorce history or their affairs were taken into account? I can think of at least one candidate that would be disqualified off the bat from that qualification. The other thing that you find is that he had to be, in ancient Israel's time, he had to be the seed of Jacob. More modernly, this might be kind of equivalent to a descendant of one of the founding fathers or one of the people who took part in the Revolutionary War. Just the idea that you were brought up in the culture and the values of the Constitution, something that someone immigrating from a socialist country may not be able to fully grasp or understand, because they're going to come with their own ideologies and their own concepts of good governance that may conflict the U.S. Constitution. So one of the other things that we find, and this is my absolute favorite of the instructions for a good leader, is that he's supposed to write a copy of the law. Modernly equivalent, this would be every leader. We have the inaugural address. Well, before the inaugural address, you'd have the leader write a complete copy of the U.S. Constitution in front of Congress. Can you imagine the course of history that could be changed just by requiring your incoming president to write a copy of the United States Constitution? He could never say, well, I didn't know, or plead the fifth in any way, because he's written it by hand and he should know the document he is defending.
What a brilliant idea. That is a brilliant idea. All of the things you just said suggest a moral code.
Absolutely. And this is something that we have really declined from. We want someone who is a Hollywood star, someone who has the babe on one hand, the wealth on the other hand, and lives the way we would like to live. Regardless of looking kind of at the past history, look at past dealings, if they own a business, how have they treated people in business? Have they tried to confiscate personal property for personal gain, to exploit laws for their own good, to make money off of someone? That's called coveting in Scripture. And when you covet someone's property and you will use the law to take that property from them, that is not honor and integrity. That's just greed. And what happens if the American people are not in that particular politician's best interest? What happens if it's more profitable for that politician to make a deal with a lobbyist group, or with, so many of these politicians now are taking money from Iran? What's to say that the American people can't be sold out? I really think you have to look at record, whether it is a public voting record if they're a politician, or their business record, and look at their history, rather than just going on, something that's hype and popular and reflects who America would like to be in 2016.
Ed, because so often when we are comparing candidates, at least in this election cycle, we're trying to compare policy statements and positions, and somehow looking back on their personhood or their personal life is, it's not allowed, so to speak. So we Christians have allowed ourselves to be excused from looking at somebody's personal background. It's seen as judgment. But on the other hand, if we don't do this, we are electing people that is going to get us into a lot of trouble.
Right. And I think we have to be careful to be discerning. I think that the term of do not judge another person, that often refers to personal trials you're going through. But when you are going for elective office, America needs to be a people of good discernment to judge between a good leader and a leader that's going to take you on a ride. I mean, we look at the last 8 years and we see some of the consequences of those policies. And do we want those for another 8 years? What do we want out of the next either 4 to 6 years? That requires a lot of research and a lot of discernment, not just always listening to the feel-good sermon, basically, that you're given on the podium either every election cycle or the free-for-all that has been happening in a lot of the debates.
When the candidates go personal on each other, and in the last cycle that we've seen, the last couple of weeks that we've seen with Cruz and Trump, they went very personal in attacking their wives. Isn't that a moral indication of who they really are?
There is. Now I will say this, and I actually had posted some things myself. I think there is an issue when you elect a person to represent your country. It's beyond that. These are leaders, people your children will look up to. And I do have to question whether or not I want my first lady to have been pictured in Playboy. That is definitely an issue that comes to mind. And I don't think that there's any issue with bringing that up. And I don't think that there is even an obstacle to bringing up Cruz's wife and her ties to Goldman Sachs. But I think that when you make it personal, and rather than focusing on the issues, focusing on the values, and then you just turn nasty, there's really no reason for it. It's obviously doing well in the polls, but it's really sad when we come to the point in American history where polls are more important than values.
Well, all we have to do is look back in order to get some footing to look forward. I mean, we did not vet properly President Obama. We just didn't do it. We swept him in the office because he was a young, good-speaking black man that had rose quickly into the political ranks, and somehow that qualified him to be president. I mean, God's pretty strict about qualifications of people. And we didn't vet him on his religious stance either. So I'm wondering if we're beyond all this in America, that the evangelicals or the Christian or the faith community is just not weighing in politically.
You know, I think there's a lot of disenfranchisement with the political system itself. And there's this idea, I can't tell you how many people that I have talked to that, you know, it comes up in everyday conversation, and everyone is really sick of the status quo for the last 20 years. They want a change. They want something different. And you're right, vetting is such an important part. And I think that they feel that there is not an adequate vetting system, that any time somebody gets into office, they can be played. So they're going to pick a candidate that they believe will hopefully play to their song or their tune better than the other candidates. And, you know, I think that's really sad that our standards have really sunk into such a low level of expectation that, you know, and I don't know that any of us can say for sure 100%, no matter the candidate, that we know exactly what we're getting should that candidate take office. And that's kind of scary, to vote for someone not knowing the end consequence of casting your ballot.
All right. Jodell, let me take a break here and we come back, because a lot of things you are talking about in qualifications for a candidate, scripturally, first applies to whether or not we are abiding by those rules and statutes that are in Scripture in church leadership, when it comes to eldership or board members or even pastor. It seems to be a popularity contest at times, and maybe you have some comments on that. We'll be right back. But by the way, you can go to YHWH is Jodell's website, and I got to tell you, this is a incredible resource, and let me encourage you to suggest getting a copy for yourself, or maybe buying one for your pastor. This thing is terrific. We'll be right back.
I'm Paulina Leiser, producer of Focus Today. Thank you for watching this video, and make sure to check our other videos at theDove.us.
Okay, we're back, and delight to have with us Jodell Onstott. She's, well, becoming a regular on the Dove, and now you see why. She's terrific, and her work here is called YHWH Exists, Volume 1. I know that she's working on others, but this is terrific. I don't know, why didn't you use this for your thesis for your PhD?
Thank you. Appreciate that, Terry. You know, I love studying. I think that when you have a love for knowledge and a quest for truth and a love of God, you know, you're always wanting to build on that. And so I hope so many people can benefit from that research. There was a lot of pain, sweat, and tears that went into that. So if it can be a blessing to others, that is just worth every bit of it. Just one of the great resources of our day. And you can check it out online, Amazon. But I would say go to YHWHExists.com and find out how you can get a copy of it there. All right, so it appeared that morality was the kind of like the gold standard for politics for years, and now we have come down to where I want to say this respectfully, and I'm not trying to lean for or against any candidate here,
But look what we're putting forward to possibly lead our country. That's the best we can come up with on a country that was founded on the principles of the Bible.
Yeah, I know. It doesn't it speak something about the American people? I look at 30 years ago, could some of these candidates have even thrown their hat in the ring? I mean, wouldn't our parents and our grandparents kind of have scoffed and just said, no way? And now it's actually viable. That it's just an anathema to me that, sometimes you wake up and one morning and you're kind of going, is this reality? What country are we living in? And I think that like what you're doing here and what I see so many people doing across the country in educating, because really this is more about political candidates. This is about the heart and the soul of the American character and who America is going to be as a society. And so I do think that there is a lot weighing in the balance, not just with this election, but I believe with the American culture, with the heart and souls. Our public universities have been indoctrinating for so many years, and we're reaping the consequence now of that indoctrination. But people, like Dove TV, and there's so many others out there that are educating to try and change that. And I just commend you guys for everything that you do, because it is effective. And, if you can reach one person, open that mind, open the heart to good values and good judgments, then, you planted a seed.
Well, thank you. And that is our heart and passion. Let me come back to what you've studied in the Old Testament as it relates to government and qualifications of leaders. It's also talked about in the New Testament, especially when you get into Timothy and Titus, as it reflects on leaders of the church. And there are some examples out there because of some other organizations and how they go about putting together a board or leadership or even a pastor. But I'm concerned about this. I really am, because the reason churches are slipping to non-committal is because their leadership is made up of people who aren't biblically qualified.
Very true. And I think part of it is epidemic of the American society itself. 1 in 4 families are no longer intact. So when you have 25, 30% of your population where you have, divorce, you have infidelity, you have something going on where those families are not intact, you actually have a smaller base on which to draw your leadership. So it becomes more difficult. So this, again, I believe is symptomatic of the American society. But I think that there are things that we can do to remedy it, but it really does begin at the state level and the government level, where policies are put into place that alleviate family stress. One of the things that I discovered in my book is that every law in the Mosaic Code really fostered the relieving of stress on the individual family unit. So when you don't have the financial pressure, you don't have the financial stress, that's one less thing that the family has, to put on its plate and to take care of. But beyond that, though, as you brought up, there are qualifications for good leadership. Whether they're there or not, this is what makes churches effective, is what makes government effective, and organizations. They're really universal principles. So you find that in Scripture, when God told Moses to appoint leaders for the children of Israel, he said, make sure that they are people who are known for their good judgment. They're supposed to be discerning and wise. They're supposed to have a humble spirit. They're not supposed to lift their heart up above their brethren. There's this idea, that has kind of come about in the past maybe 15 years, where the executive office is one that rules over the people rather than being a servant to the people. And that is something that I believe we really have to reclaim. We both have mentioned Timothy. 1 Timothy 3 gives excellent qualifications for leadership. And this should not be limited to just the church. This is good for leadership, whether it's Boy Scouts of America or a Fortune 500 company. These qualifications make strong people, and strong value-committed people make very good leaders. So the idea that he should rule his own house well, he shouldn't be drunk, he shouldn't have a temper where he lashes out and he strikes people. He shouldn't be greedy. He should be sober, given to hospitality. All of these ideas are qualifications. They're character traits that make effective leaders. And if you look at the people that you are attracted to, like Zig Ziglar, Dr. Dobson, so many of these people embody these characteristics. So I think that when we hold on to them and that when we require it, it really comes down to the American people demanding higher standards for both themselves and for their leaders. And I think that when we can uphold ourselves and our leaders to that standard, that we are moving in the right direction.
Well, Jodell, we struggle between grace and what God's laws, statutes, and principles say. We want to put those in the category of legalism and then shy away from them and go with the grace. But when you look, God was, and still is, very clear about the qualifications of leadership, which is obviously biblically and morally based. I think what we're seeing today in this election cycle is, and here's what I'm hearing, they know that Ted Cruz is a Christian and stands for Christian principles. They don't like Donald Trump, but they like what he's doing. Therein lies a conflict. I mean, the faith-based person is going, what do I do with this?
It is a conflict because on one hand, you have Trump who is challenging the establishment. I happen to agree with Trump's stance on China's inflation of their or devaluation of their own currency. I think he makes some very cogent and salient points regarding what it takes to bring the industry back to America. I agree with it. But on the other hand, I'm not that hopeful or that optimistic where it comes to Supreme Court nominees. I think he has a rather liberal interpretation of the Constitution or where individual rights are concerned. I think those are an issue. Where Cruz, when you look at Cruz's record, throughout every legislation, people I don't think are really even aware of this, but he coined the term the Washington cartel. And for like the last 4 or 5 years, he has stood in the Senate defending the Constitution, standing against all of these 20, 30-year dinosaurs that have just been in the Senate forever. And he stands against them, this lonely totem pole, opposing them for constitutional values. So I don't know that you can go wrong there. That is something that America needs because the Constitution is really what gives us our freedom and secures our future.
Well, I think you're making a good argument because if we're able to compromise the Constitution, and let me put it this way, maybe we are compromising the Constitution because we have compromised the Bible.
Excellent point. A society that can't stand on value simply can't stand. You start first with Scripture. Scripture has been denigrated by the academics. One of the things that I try to do in my writing is challenge the atheistic academic norm because so much misinformation is put out there as credible science when it is not. There are so much evidence. Like, let me give you an example just this week. This week in Egypt, in Aswan, Egypt, a Roman-era synagogue was discovered, excavated by German archaeologists. The post-revolution Egypt is not that friendly to anything religious, especially when it ties to Israel or Jews within the land of Egypt. So this Roman-era synagogue had Jewish inscriptions on it. It had the Star of David. The Antiquities Authority in Egypt accused these archaeologists of defacing this temple and putting stars of David there themselves. When it is clear, you can look at the photos and you can see this is an archaeological context. This has not been, I'm sure there'll be patina studies and all of that. But here is what is something that is being labeled academia, something that is being labeled, Egyptian Antiquity Authority. And they are challenging a on-the-ground dig excavation where these things are, in situ. They're being excavated there. So the deception in academia is at every point, and politics plays an important part of this. So many of your academics are socialists, and they have been teaching our children something that are not biblical values. So there has been this erosion of biblical values where our children don't even know what they believe. So unless they're in church and you just happen to have a really good Sunday school teacher that is very well educated and can give them this information, where else are they going to get it?
Wow.
So yeah, we have a big road ahead of us.
Jodell, I'm out of time. Thank you. You're a delight and an inspiration. Look forward to many more visits. Let me encourage our viewers and listeners, go to YHWHExist.com. That's the website. Check out the book Yahweh Exists Volume 1 and also correspond with her there. This is a must resource in anybody's library. Just don't buy it and put it on the shelf. Just buy it and look at it and read it. Thank you, Jodell. Let's hook up again soon, okay?
Thank you.
Good to see you again. All right, we'll be right back.